Let's talk about, since we've set the stage a little bit for, you joining Jim Crockett Promotions. We haven't spent a ton of time on your time in Jim Crockett. I'm sure we're going to, break down every aspect of your career, as part of Jim Crockett, but I guess I just want to sort of touch on the high points. At this point, I guess you've been with the company for about a year. Is that right?
Started March the 5th, 1985.
So we're several months in. At this point, are you starting to settle in to your tag team and your partnership and your just real life relationship with Ole?
Yeah, I tell you, you can back up. I told a story early on in our podcast deal about what ifs and Matt Bourne getting fired. And had he not gotten fired, Ole might not have went out and researched and found the Road Warriors at that time. And that was one of those questions where you went, wow, what if? There was a what if here, and going just because of the relevancy of we're talking about Greensboro and we're talking about Starrcade. The very first, I hadn't been to working for Crockett very long, and I can't remember, but it wasn't very long, and I was on that was actually my first Greensboro house show. But it was pretty full, and it was a lot of money. I want to say it was 300 plus grand. Hadn't been there that long. Hadn't really got this was pre-Horsemen, pre-all that. And I want to say it was probably maybe a month to 6 weeks after I'd been there. But I got my payoff for that show. And I usually don't discuss money because of the irrelevancy of what it was a long time ago. But this is one of those what ifs. My last week wrestling for Bob Armstrong and the Fullers, there was two ways you could go in those days a promoter would do when you were leaving, when you had put your notice in. They would either screw you on the way out because they had 2 weeks, of your money backed up. You didn't get paid for 2 weeks. So after you left, you got like 2 checks. Or the ones that wanted to leave a favorable impression, like the Fullers and Bob Armstrong, would give you a really good payoff on the way out. So had the best payoff of the entire 14 months that I'd had in Pensacola was my last check. So they left a huge positive feel good, about their company. Well, I get my check and I'm looking at this and it was less than my last week for the Fullers. And I go, this can't be right. There's no way this can be right. So I went into Jim Crockett, which I had never done. And, after I'd been in the business a little longer and had a family to worry about, let's just say my balls shrunk up a little bit. But I had a set at that point in time. And I went in and went, hey, this is ridiculous. That Greensboro show was $300-something thousand. What kind of payoff is this? Oh, well, Arn, you weren't, you're not positioned where we want you yet. We have big plans for you and all that. I said, listen, if you got big plans for me, which you just said, pay me like a guy that you got plans for. Well, in that position, I think I was second match of the night, maybe wrestling Sam Houston or something like that. He said, well, that's what that pays in that slot. I said, let me ask you something. If I was Blackjack Mulligan and walked in here, would you say that to him if you had him in the second match? Well, Jimmy got flustered. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I'll just go call Bob and I'll just go back to Pensacola. Because at that point in time, we were driving a bunch and I've been on some really bad houses. So wasn't in the best of moods, and we finally get some light at the end of the tunnel. You got a huge house out here, and I'll just go ahead and tell you, it was a $700 payoff. That may sound like a lot of money back then, but not for the conversation I'd had with Dusty and Jimmy Crockett and where we were heading and all these different things and all the miles I was putting in and having rotten. I get it. When you got a rotten house, you got a $9,000 house, you got to get paid on that. It's not very good. So that's another one of those that had that conversation have went any further south, I was prepared just to go pack my car up and head back to Pensacola, give Bob a call and say, hey, can you take me back? And I'm sure he would have. And I actually called him and he said, well, sure, but you ought to give him a chance. You know, he gave me some good advice and, you know, but if not, if you need a place, you've always got a place here. This is a long story short, but it was one of those what ifs that had I left, not being there to be part of that group and name them, you might not have had a Four Horsemen. Food for thought.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's certainly a story I'd never heard. I don't think you've probably ever even told that story publicly, have you?
Well, I never discussed payoffs, and I didn't. It's none of my business what anybody else makes.
Right.
I never asked. Nobody ever asked me. You just don't do that in this business. It's just not in good taste. But I thought the relevancy of where it started with Jim Crockett and where it ended and the evolution of all that was, for me, that was as important as being on Starcade. How did I get there? And what did I have to do to qualify myself to be in a feature spot on future Starcades? And I just thought it was part of the story. So I know it was long-winded. I apologize to the listening audience and apologize to you.
No, not at all. Listen, that's what we're here for, man. We want your stories, and nobody's giving us that type of insight but you. I mean, I got to know though, did he make it right?
He did not make it right. It stuck, but what I saw was a gradual escalation in my opponents, and I saw a gradual escalation in my payoffs. Because in those days, you would have normally just, you know, gotten fired. Jimmy Crockett would have just said, oh, that doesn't work for you. Well, how does this work for you? You finish up tonight. Could have very easily went that way, one way or the other. You know, he had all the power, not me. The difference was I was 25, 26 years old. Whatever I was, I didn't have any wife. I didn't have any kids, and I didn't give a shit. There was probably 15 places to work at that time. And I was gung-ho, and I got to a big territory after now. I had worked for Watts. I had worked for Ole. I had worked for Continental. And I had some seasoning behind myself. I was confident in my promos. I was confident in my ability to work at that time, 3 years in or whatever I was. And it takes a little longer than that, but you couldn't tell me that at the time. I thought I had her down. And I did have it down enough to at least bluff my way through a conversation with Jimmy Crockett at that time. So, you know, and I think he sensed that, because there wasn't any poor, pitiful me. It was, hey, this is bullshit. You know, I heard what the house was. I know enough about the business now that it warrants a little bigger payoff than what I got, but he did not make it right. So there's another time it wasn't made right.